Anna, such a pleasure to have you on. Second time we do this, so I very much appreciate it. I guess a natural place to start the conversation is Coral. So maybe a first question is maybe explain to us the thesis behind the company.
Yeah, so Coral is a virtual health platform that allows women in their prime years to thrive. And so, what we're building is a platform, a community, an app that allows women to truly understand their health, their bodies, their metabolism, their hormones, and how to use all of that in order to optimize their health and live their best lives. We're focused initially at perimenopause, menopause, and beyond, and over time might expand access. So I can go now into kind of the why or
Maybe a more personal question, right? So you found a dialogue, you sold the company, obviously. Why another startup?
think it I always felt like when see there is a problem and I know that I have the skills or the time or the resources to solve it, it just something that comes naturally to do it. Women's health specifically, something that I've always been very passionate about. And after I left Dialogue, I started looking more into women's health and more specifically menopause and perimenopause to see that there's an absolutely enormous gap. And those when we're in perimenopause and menopause as women, those are years where we should be living our best lives. Our kids are slightly older, our parents are not that old, so we should be contributing at the top of our abilities at work in our communities. And what ends up happening is that 95% of us are going to have symptoms of perimenopause and menopause. 1 in 10 of us are going to fully drop out of the workforce or of anything we're doing. And solutions are not really accessible. There isn't that much research. And so what ends up happening is that a lot of these women suffer on their own. And it just felt like that problem needed to be solved. And by a miracle of the universe, I started having my own hormonal issues. So I started having an issue with my thyroid. And so there's a number of hormones that kind of balance your body and the way it feels. And so my I had a thyroiditis and I was told that it's going to recover, no problem. And so many months in, about 6 months in, as I'm working on, on Coral and launching it, I stopped sleeping. I started having insomnia. I'd wake up at 1 or 2 in the morning. I wasn't able to sleep the rest of the night. I started having anxiety. I've never had anxiety in my life. And it got to a point where I was asking myself, I was actually telling myself, like, I don't think I can do this. I now have 3 kids. Like, probably it's just, I don't have enough energy anymore to do this. And eventually I got the right medication. I also changed a number of things in my life. And my energy now is back at the same level as it was like before having kids. And so I was able to live this feeling of not wanting to step in, not wanting to take on a new project because I just felt terrible. And I think this is how a lot of women feel in those perimenopause years. And this is just insomnia and anxiety. And there are 30 symptoms that, or over 30 symptoms, I should say, that women live through. And it just felt to me that it's a problem that needed a solution that was truly impactful. We ran the Coral program with pilot users for the last year, and every single one of them spoke about how their life was changed through our approach. And so that's when we decided to assemble a team, raise money, and deploy it to all Canadian women.
Yeah, that's a great story. And I think if the universe is pointing you to do something, is like as you're working on Coral, this happens to you. How did you go from identifying like a very big thorny problem? Like you said, it's like well, I won't talk about TAM as a joke, and it's like half the planet basically.
Yeah.
Half the people, all women go through this. Going from this to examining, let's say, like traditional healthcare, was like seeing your family doctor, etc., to like, okay, how do we could provide a solution in this space?
Yeah. So how did I go about going from like the idea to the solution? Is that
Exactly.
the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so initially spent a few months researching the problem space. and asking myself, why wasn't this done before? And what's the extent of the problem? Is there really a problem? Are women just okay or feeling like they're feeling, or do they want certain things to be different? And so, partly understanding the problem, sizing it, but also understanding willingness to pay. And so that took about maybe 6 to 8 months, after which point I decided to assemble a team. And so assembling the initial team, the initial founding team, also takes some time. I wanted to find a co founder and CEO for the venture. And so that took some time to find the right partner, which I did. I have an amazing co founder called Fiona Lake Waslander, who was also already thinking about the problem. And so when we connected, it just made sense for us to work together, as well as our co founder, John McCalla, who joined us as our third co founder. Building out that team. And as I mentioned, throughout this kind of first year of understanding the problem, defining the approach, we began testing it with users almost immediately. I was joined by somebody I've worked with back at Dialogue who since left and she was doing other things, but she was an incredible nurse who's also trained in nutrition, fitness, psychology. And so we started, and I'll speak about what the coral approach is, but we started offering it what we thought was the right solution to a number of women to see whether or not there will the same amount of impact as we expected us to have. And we did. And I think the pilot is actually part of what encouraged us so much to go forward with us and try to go full speed, because we feel that if we can have the impact we had on a small group of users more at large, then we can have a truly generational impact on women and women's health. And that's Coral's vision.
Okay, very cool, very cool. And my understanding of the solution is it's like, and maybe I'll feel free to disagree, but it feels similar in the sense of what you took the learnings from dialogue and applied them in a more vertical specific domain here, specifically to women's health, right? So women that signs up pays a subscription fee and has access to the latest medical support. And I believe there's also an exchange. You can send in your like a blood test, etc. Do you mind maybe unpacking it a bit, explaining it better than I am?
Sure. Yeah, I'll explain what the platform is all about. So a member does register into the Coral platform. After which there a number of steps happen. First is that we send a nurse to someone's home or they go in person to do an initial, what we call it, a baseline panel of blood work. Now, why that's important, we test a few hormones. So we test thyroid, insulin, and cortisol. And then we also test a number of metabolic markers. We test some vitamins. Why? Because we want to have a very clear understanding where the symptoms are coming from. Oftentimes, when somebody is mid 40 or 50 and they come in and they have a number of symptoms, quickly gets attributed to sex hormones. But if somebody's, let's say, thyroid is slightly unbalanced, or somebody's insulin is almost pre diabetic, but not quite, or somebody is highly anemic, those will all contribute to fatigue, sleep, and a number of other symptoms. So, understanding this kind of baseline health is really important. So, we work with partners in order to could do this initial kind of panel of very specific and relevant blood tests first. We then provide a prescription for body composition. So that shows us bone health as well as the distribution of fat versus muscle. A lot of women in the perimenopause, menopause years complain about weight gain. But if we don't have a clear understanding of how their what their body composition is, then it's hard to start and explain how weight gain works. A lot of women say, I'm doing the exact same thing as I used to, but I keep gaining pounds. And that's when we can start having conversation around body composition, around muscle building, and how building more muscle will help us do what we call body recomposition and stop this weight gain that often women talk about. So, blood panel, body composition, and then we do a number of health questionnaires that complete this full picture that we're trying to get around this woman, right? So it could be medication, it could be objectives, symptoms, health history, and your mother's menopause years. How did she, went through it? And those are all relevant materials into the solution. Once that's done, the member gets assigned to a team that's a nurse practitioner and a coach that will be following them over the following 6 months and more. And so, in those follow ups, what ends up happening is a lot of education. That's when we explain to women what their blood work says, how that's related to their symptoms that they've expressed to us, as well as their objectives. We have a coach that works with members to provide education, ongoing support, 24/7 asynchronous chat as well. And so there is this kind of, it's almost, we like to say, an Olympian who plays at the top of their league in sport, they all have a team that follows them. Women in their prime years should have that same team. So it's a team of its providers and coaches who follow them in order to achieve one goal and then move on to the next. So somebody who comes in and doesn't sleep, maybe we'll start by fixing the sleep first as a foundational kind of piece, after which we're going to maybe work on weight gain, after which we're going to work on reducing hot flashes. If somebody requires a menopause specific prescription, we can prescribe that, or additional labs, we can also do that. But the idea is really to provide this kind of extra level of education, testing, and just follow up to make sure that women understand and women improve.
Yeah, that's a great model. No, thanks for clarifying, Anna. And yet, so many questions I want to ask. So it's a subscription. Someone signs up for an annual license, and you get access to all these experts, which I find is really cool. I didn't know that part. Yeah. So you see, it feels similar in terms of the dialogue playbook, in terms of what you build, because it's all done remotely in terms of access to this expertise. Do you think any of those lessons will be applicable here?
Absolutely. When we build dialogue, the dialogue model is very, very different to Coral. Coral is a different model. It addresses a different market. So I think it's actually very much complementary from that standpoint. But to your question and to your point, yes, there's absolutely core lessons, I would say, that are applicable. The first one is around medical rigor. Dialogue, in my opinion, is one of the leaders globally in terms of high quality virtual, rigorous telemedicine. And so we've never compromised back a dialogue on anything we did from a medical standpoint. It involved, doing audits. We put a number of guardrails in order to make sure that the way we practiced telemedicine was safe, was good for the patient, was just best in class. And that has served us really well at Dialogue. And I think this is one of the key components for Coral, is making sure that everything we do is based on research, is research, as we say, research informed. And that it's great is that there is research. Like, for example, some of the best research on testosterone comes from Australia, but we're able to pull on that research and the learnings in order to incorporate it into what we do. And so we're able to, because all we focus on is hormonal health for women in perimenopause and menopause, we're actually able to go and pull on kind of the best available research globally. And so that medical rigor is something that is absolutely core to what we do. A lot of women in perimenopause, menopause, they end up searching for their symptoms on Instagram, and they end up spending thousands of dollars a year on supplements that are not tested. And we don't want that, right? I think for us, it's really important that some supplements are great, but there needs to be a reason for them. And again, like, that sort of rigorous approach is something that's really, really important. At Dialogue, we hired the best team members. We've never compromised on the quality of the people who came in. And that is a huge learning. And I think something that we're really focused on here at Coral as well is making sure that every single team member is amazing. And the other piece is a dialogue, we really cared about member experience. Like, that is something that we truly wanted every single person who came onto the platform to have a great experience. And in this case, that is something that remains really, really important. We measure ourselves at Coral on the health outcomes and the improvements that every single member achieves. And so everything we do and all we think about is, how do we make sure that every single member who comes in, because we're measuring ourselves on it, is actually improving, aging, and feeling better.
Yeah. I imagine you got this question a lot, right? In the age of like ubiquitous AI, like how does Coral compare when you have, let's say, instant answers to any question? And I guess my answer would be is like you have world class expertise, and particularly in a moment where your users, your customers are not looking for a simple Chat GPT answer. They're looking for like people that are able to diagnose their issue specifically. So I'm curious, how did you address that question?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, first of all, we're building our platform using the latest available agents, AI, and actually it explains why we're able to build a big part of what we have today using a lot of the current tools that are available. So it's actually net positive and very additive for the service we're offering. We also do have an AI chatbot that's trained on, I was mentioning like the Australia research on a number of these papers that are published globally in order to answer women more specifically on hormonal metabolic health issues and menopause issues within the app. So we do have that. But the human touch is still something that is important because when you have an accountability partner who's there to support you, explain to you how things work, sure, they can send you a video to watch, but somebody who's there and who's going to look at your Fitbit data and say, "Hey, your sleep went from 7 hours a night to 5 hours a night. What happened? Should we book some time to chat about this?" There's nothing that replaces this today, this human touch. And what we've seen that, we're all humans. And so we end up relating to other humans. So if we have a coach that we really get along with really well, it becomes a much deeper relationship that maintains and continues over the months. And so that piece is also really important. So I think AI is very additive to what we do on both like productivity, the tech build, and so many of the tools that we're able to integrate into our platform from the get go. But we still believe that the human touch is important.
Yeah, yeah, I don't disagree with that. If I find, if anything, the with the plethora of AI, it's going to become even more important. So I think people will hunger more for and crave for more of this human connection, especially when it comes to like important things like their health. Maybe another personal question, Anna. You guys obviously just came out of stealth. I want to say announced your seed funding, and I saw that you took the role of executive chairman. So why not jump in? Take a more active operator role. I understand exec chairman, you're probably be quite a bit involved, but
Yeah. Look, I when I started working on Coral, and I have, as I mentioned, three very young kids, and I still get woken up during the night, and then we all get up at 5 a.m. and my kids get sick. And so I saw, as I was initially working on this idea, that the number of days where I had to stop everything and take care of a sick child or was very high. And I really believe in this idea. This company needs to exist and it needs to be led by my wish was to partner with somebody who would feel like that I would trust this Coral with this idea. As I mentioned, as I met Fiona, she's a repeat founder. She's an incredible tech entrepreneur. 20 years ago, she was managing Yahoo Travel when that was one of the largest travel sites in the world. And then she had a number of exits since then. And when we decided to join forces, it just felt like the right thing. I'm bringing the experience in healthcare and healthcare in Canada and scaling this sort of business. And she's bringing a very operational, hands on approach and a vision that's inspiring to the team. And I think together we make a great team. And all through fundraising and all through the past months, I am so much more convinced that this is the right structure. Now, it's an unusual structure. It felt to me, though, that that was the right one to empower somebody else to make the decisions. And we make a great team. I think often a CEO is asked to do fundraising and to speak externally and to motivate the team and be in the details for product. And it's like the job description is so long that a lot of CEOs end up burning out and end up not doing some of their really important pieces. And so by having both of us there in this very clear structure, it's not like a co-CEO role where everyone is like, who's deciding, who should I go to? It's very, very clear, the decision-making structure. And at the same time, we both work on our strengths and support each other in ways that make Coral even better.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And she sounds like a great leader. So I'm looking forward to meeting her. And as I just mentioned, you guys just announced your round, $4 million seed funding led by the good folks at Brightspark. And I think Diagram participated as well. Curious to hear you a little bit on the story of the fundraising. Maybe a first question there would be is like, what were the most common objections you got?
I think there isn't that much funding going into women's health. Surprisingly, there are a lot of questions about TAM and willingness to pay. I would say those are pretty big, and I think it takes investors like Brightspark, like Diagram and like the 51 who also really wanted to join in on this round because they were saying like we know this is a big problem and we believe you guys will figure out a way to solve this. And that's what it takes. And I think I'm obviously biased, but I think that's what makes for great investors is to say, we want to invest in teams that are solving problems we believe should be solved. And so, yeah, that was both an objection, but at the same time, with those who ended up investing, for them, it was actually something very positive as part of their investment thesis.
Yeah. Along the same line, so I imagine there's a certain part that you guys have very, very deep conviction on. Like you mentioned, look, the problem obviously exists. It's not going away. It's a natural problem of the world. The need, the user need. In terms of like how you deliver it, is it more in the sense of like how you maybe acquire users? So like in terms of like different tactical branches, what are the biggest hypotheses that you think you need to validate?
So, one is the first one is the user acquisition channels. We're going to be testing those. We're going to be testing different ones. Is it going to be paid? Is it going to be earned? Is it going to be is it going to be events? Like there's a number of angles we'll be going after and seeing. And the reality is in a D2C, it's kind of all this has to be there and it's like puzzle pieces that fit together. But we'll see. Or we have a strong hypothesis that word of mouth will be a really important acquisition kind of path, and therefore making that very easy will become important to us. So I would say user acquisition will be something we'll be testing over the next year. The pricing model is something we'll be testing over the next year. Right now, the way we've built pricing is that we actually make it accessible to be reimbursed by healthcare spending accounts. So half of the Canadian population has access to healthcare spending accounts. And actually, at the end of the year, most people have half of their healthcare spending accounts still unused. And so the amount that we're charging Coral annually actually fits within that space available. Now, this is all averages. So will that resonate with our user? Will they be claiming it on healthcare spending accounts or not? So I think those are all questions we'll be validating. We have a strong hypothesis that the blood work and the body composition is really important to understanding our health and then how to move from there. That's another piece we'll be testing. And obviously, we'll be developing the platform further. We'll be integrating wearables because those are really our Apple Health and others are really important to track metrics on a daily basis and see how the changes we're making to our health are reflected in our day-to-day metrics, such as our heart rate variability, for example, our sleep duration. So those are all pieces that we'll be looking into and testing over the next months.
Yeah. One idea that may be horrible was like, oh, maybe sponsoring women's health podcast or creating your own. So one idea there, it made me think immediately of all these health experts that talk
Yeah.
about like how women should be doing weightlifting, and it shouldn't be a bad thing, right? So a bunch of people, I think Huberman, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
How do you think about time to value? Because it's a remote service. How do you get your team obsessed about, okay, we need to make sure that within the first X days the users are seeing value? How do you think about that question?
So there are a number. So we think about it a lot, right? Because the moment you sign up, there's something that you need to receive, and often the value, interestingly, comes from feeling heard and feeling hopeful that you'll feel better, that you will gain back the energy that you've had. In a lot of cases, that kind of summarizes in very simplistic terms to that. So as soon as somebody signs up, even though we first need questionnaires and we first need baseline tests, we do have a human connection where we connect with the member, we explain what's to come, we provide a listening ear and also hope. And so we continue that. And in that first meeting that happens with the nurse, we're actually very focused on both explaining and providing education, which you receive value from, and then interpreting your results and talking about next steps. Assigning a coach, making sure that there's daily follow up at the beginning is something that's really, really important for us to important to us, but so that the member feels like they're getting those two things, right? We're hearing them, we're there to give them hope, and then we're setting them on a path to improvement.
Yeah. Oftentimes there's a question when you start a startup is like, hey, what's the big vision and how big can this be? Sometimes it's like, just start small. I'm saying small with air quotes because you're going for a huge problem. But do you think of that about that at all? Like a larger vision, like potentially additional services, products that you guys can develop?
Yes, our vision is to make a whole generation of women healthier and thriving at the prime of their lives. And so we are specializing in hormonal and metabolic health. And so, can that be expanded to maybe one day postpartum, to other areas of women's health that are underserved? Absolutely. And I think that because of the way we're building this model, it makes it very expandable, right? So it gives the ability to grow and reach audiences outside of Canada. Now, we don't feel like we need to do the international expansion too quickly because the problem within Canada is big. And we think that we can do it's almost like our proof of concept is here. After which, expanding and yeah, and going into parallel conditions. And then I think the sky is the limit. I think that there are, like you said, there are products that become relevant to plug in and use in order to achieve this extra level of health understanding or health functioning. So I think there's so many possibilities. If there's one thing I've learned over the years is focus is so important. And that's why like I keep coming back to perimenopause, menopause. Just there the problem is huge. Understanding the hormones and actually like helping our members understand how hormones impact how they feel and how their metabolism and what they eat impacts how their symptoms present themselves. What they eat in the evening will impact how they'll sleep. I mean, there's so many key pieces of information around sleep, nutrition, training that we need to put in place. And so we feel like that is the focus right now. And then once we nail that, then we can expand it. But I think really important for now for us to remain focused.
You mentioned that you went through that personal like health challenge when you're starting Coral. Would you be open to sharing like what you did specifically to help, like you said, having more energy than you ever had?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of things I did. One is um, 90% of women going through perimenopause and menopause. So actually only 10% of women take hormone replacement therapy, so medication. So like the vast majority of women, I was saying I don't want to take any medication. Like my body, my hormones, I've always been healthy, I've always eaten healthy. Like my body is supposed to recover on its own. And what I was ignoring is that if I'm not sleeping, I'm not giving the chance to my hormones and to the rest of my body to reduce its inflammation and recover. And so a number of things happened. One is I started medication and I understood why it was important. Two is that I changed a number of things in my from a diet standpoint, I cut out gluten and dairy and sugar. I was already non-drinking alcohol, which was great, but basically I cut out everything that is inflammatory and is known to be related to low thyroid function. And so cutting that actually had additional benefits, such as completely removing my PMS. And we talk about PMS. Part of it is that if your body is, and I'm not a doctor, for all the hormone health experts listening to this, I'm really simplifying it. But when you have inflammation in your body, you do experience your symptoms more heavily. So making that change was instrumental. When I was in hypothyroidism, I gained weight. So I started training differently. I used to go for runs because I felt like this was what was the best thing for me. But I also learned that when you have a stressful day at work and you don't sleep and your cortisol is already very high, if you go for a run, you spike your cortisol even more. Your body, all it does is it says, I need to retain all the sugar I have. I used to do intermittent fasting. Huge error, because there's actually new research that says that you should absolutely not work out fasted. And I used to do that. So I started eating in the morning. It changed my workout regimen from jogging to strength, like to lift, and really focusing on what I do go to bed, actually like taking a few small steps in order to unwind. It's small, it sounds small, but doing this like religiously and in a very disciplined way really made a huge difference for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so tying it back to Coral, it's like all those relatively small changes will put together end up having a tremendous impact. And that's going to be hard by just reading the internet. You should be able to do this.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And I didn't take do them all at the same time. It was like one small step after another. And as I was feeling better and as I was finally sleeping through the night, I felt like I had enough energy to start lifting. And so like these things were implemented over a number of months. But to me, like it was transformational. And I think that and that's what we've seen with our members as well, is that, and it's personalized, right? Not everybody is going to have the exact same routine or the exact same need. I mean, we have women who come in who maybe don't work because they stay at home or they choose not to. And then there's other ones who are extremely busy. So busy they don't have time for choral. But then you work with them to create a little piece of time for choral. And then you start working on the why don't you have time and what's underneath that, and then you get to the point like what really matters to them, and once we understand that, then we're able to build upon that, and that's when we're able to see these kind of success stories as we've had over the last year, and that we'll be scaling and continuing to have now with Coral being out of stealth mode.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end the conversation, and it's been such a pleasure. Maybe a final question is if people want to follow the journey or reach out, what's the best way?
So coral.ca, and it's Coral to Thrive on all socials. And yeah, it's really a pleasure. Thank you so much for shining a light on this really important topic, especially in a time when there's a lot of attention being brought up to other things that actually do remove focus from important topics such as women's health. So thank you so much, Nectar. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Anna.